Welcome to part 2 of the answer to what is the best 3D DCC that's out there, period.
Hi. So, Mo, we actually want to talk about what the best 3D DCC is today.
The bestest of them all. I mean, you suggested the topic.
And I think it's a valid topic. And of course, let's just state there is, of course, no best 3D software. But they have advantages and disadvantages. And let's talk a little bit about the tools.
Yeah, let's talk tools and let's talk advantages, disadvantages, which tool you want to use for which part of the job, and maybe factors that might influence the decision of which tool to learn next or which tool to add to your arsenal next.
Yeah. I mean, in recent days, the landscape is a little thin. There used to be a plethora of tools out there, but a lot of them did not make it. Yeah, and now we are left with only a few, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because the ones we still have are a lot more polished than they used to be. But at the same time, especially niche products are not that often found anymore.
Which ones do you miss or which ones do you refer to?
Yeah, when I started, there was stuff like FormZ, which was a NURBS construction modeling program for architects that had polygonal tools and just a very, very strange approach on things. And then there was a program by Electric Image that was using voxel sculpting, a little bit like 3D Code.
Oh, interesting.
There was quite some stuff out there, and we are seeing a consolidation. So what 3D DCCs do we have? Of course, the big ones are, I'd say, Maya. 3D Studio Max is still around.
Yeah, it's still alive for some reason.
We have Cinema 4D.
Yes.
We have Blender.
We do have Blender. Would you count Moto into that mix?
I think so, although I have the feeling that Moto's days have been more hilarious in the past.
Yeah.
Since they were bought by the Foundry, not much happened.
Yeah.
I'm not very well informed, but I have the feeling that there is not that much happening anymore.
Yeah.
And then we have, of course, Houdini.
Yeah.
Very important. And I think even Lightwave is still around and can be bought.
I'm not sure.
The last time we talked about Strata Studio 3D, and I think you can buy this one still.
Beautiful.
And then, of course, there is this cut type modeling stuff.
Like Rhino, Fusion.
Exactly. But I don't think we have to talk about these.
No. I mean, we could factor in stuff like 3D Code or ZBrush.
Yeah, that of course, and Substance Designer, and Substance Painter, and Armor Paint for that matter. But to stick with the big ones, so if you want to pick one, what do you consider? I think what a lot of people are thinking about when they try to decide which program to learn is where the program is used. And this used to be a very easy decision because it always was Maya, because Maya was the one that was used in film production and visual effects and everywhere in character animation, and it still is.
Do you think that that's still the main decision or the main factor that people factor in when they do that decision, where the software is used?
I'm unsure, but of course, if you're trying to build a career, you probably think about what to learn to be able to use it later on. And it is a valid question because...
It absolutely is, but I think accessibility was or used to be a main factor as well. That explains why so many people tended to learn Blender as their first 3D tool. Even back then when Blender was not as widespreadly adopted in the industry as it's suddenly gaining traction in the industry.
Yeah, that's true. And accessibility is something you can discuss on many levels because Blender is very accessible or used to be accessible because of the price, not necessarily because of the ease of use. I think a lot of people flock to Cinema 4D for the ease of use in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I was an active Cinema 4D user, I can say it's true.
Yeah, same goes for me. I chose it because it was easy. Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe talk first about ease of use.
Okay, so we isolated those three factors: industry adoption,
yes,
accessibility, be it just from a price standpoint or from an educational standpoint, and ease of use.
Yes. And then, of course, the bare power.
Performance.
Performance
and features.
What can the program actually do?
So let's discuss those.
Yeah. So if we start with accessibility, we already mentioned Blender. And of course, it is very accessible because it is free.
It's free. You can just download it. It runs on every major operating system.
And it is actively developed. So you get a lot of features all the time and you can download easily and update easily. And I think there is nothing that can beat Blender in this regard.
No, probably not, no.
And then from a learning standpoint, Blender used to be a little complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Because they did not adhere to standards all the time, like back in the day when you had to right-click to select in Blender. But
that was just hilarious.
Is history.
Yeah.
Today,
thankfully so.
Blender actually adopts the standards. And I think it is quite easy to learn.
It is, I think.
So from this standpoint, Blender might be a good first choice because it's not that hard to get into it. And you have a very, very active and broad community. Millions of video tutorials out there of varying quality, but yeah. And because it's not bloated, because it's not packed with features, you can stay quite focused when learning 3D. So I think in this regard, Blender has an edge over the competition.
Let's talk maybe performance and features in Blender then.
Yeah, from what I saw, all the main stuff that you would expect from a standard DCC is there. So you can do character animation, you can do modeling, you can do animation. Now with geometry nodes, you can even do procedural animation to a certain extent. And it does not stop there because Blender is actually a product that tries to have the entire workflow in one program. So there is a compositor and even a editing program, the VSE, inside of Blender and a capable render engine. So you really get everything that you need to start out with 3D.
What's not there?
Well, what is not there, most stuff is there. They do have a particle system. They do have bullet physics. They do even have fluid simulation with Manta flow. But that stuff is lacking, actually. So it's not meant to be a visual effects package. And the stuff is not interconnected. It's not running as fast as it could run. And it's not very polished, especially the particle system is very outdated and not very capable. And then there are, although they have quite okay Python support, they are lacking an option for just combining the individual modules together by coding or customization, because if you want to write add-ons for Blender, you have to deal with a lot of boilerplate code before you can even start. So there is no thing as like the Python node from Cinema 4D or a wrangle in Houdini where you can just put down an operator and start scripting. Instead, you have to create a Python add-on, and even if you do so, these add-ons are quite slow. I think that is a main drawback. And then in certain areas, of course, stuff is just missing from Blender. Like, for example, the Mo graph module that is very important for Cinema 4D. There is no such thing. And there is no dedicated stuff for terrains as you find them in Houdini, and there is no particle-based physics like Vellum or something like this, PDD.
And I'm very sure that the Blender fan crowd and the Blender users are quick to point out in the comments that there are solutions for everything of this.
Oh, absolutely, and that is something that we have to state here. There are always solutions. There is always an ecosystem of plugins and add-ons, and you can, of course, extend your program.
I think we should point this out with every program, not only Blender, but also Cinema 4D, Houdini, Maya, whatever you look at. You have your ways of hacking the program and adapting it. It's just the question of how much force, of how much effort is needed.
Do you want to do that? Let's just discuss what's there. And of course, you can always use or rely on third-party add-ons or plugins to extend your core program.
So
No.
Blender's industry adoption then, something I think we should talk about.
Yeah, and I'm not too sure about the industry adoption. I think it does not play a large role in visual effects and movie making, filmmaking, and yet.
Yeah.
But I've seen it being used in advertising and motion graphics more recently, just because it's just from a company perspective, it's just a nice thing to have because you can just install as many workstations as you want, and you don't have to worry about software cost or.
It's sometimes not even about the cost of a license, but about the effort of license management, license distribution, freeing up a license, transporting it to another workstation. All that hassle is just gone.
Yeah. And the hassle is gone. Blender is mature, if you ask me. And recently we see more and more Blender artists because from a employer's perspective, it's not only about the software and the capabilities of the software, but about finding people that can actually use the software, and that used to be a problem with Blender, but it is not as much of a problem anymore. I have the feeling.
And I think that is due to the interface changes and the more industry standards they adopted.
Absolutely. And of course, because Blender sees so much support by different players. So I think Blender has a bright future, but of course it is still limited regarding features, at least as far as I can tell, compared to other packages. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing because you don't get easily distracted by stuff that you won't need.
That's correct. So which other package should we discuss next?
Well, if you talk Blender in the advertisement industry, the next thing that comes to my mind is Cinema 4D.
Yep.
Because when I started out using Cinema 4D, it was really very niche.
Yeah.
And everybody laughed at you or at me when I said, well, I'm working with Cinema 4D. Yeah. It was considered a toy. Sorry to say that, but that is used to be reality back in 2002 or so.
Still, when I started in 2009 or 2010, you were still looked upon a bit weirdly when you claimed that you're starting out using Cinema 4D.
But that changed over the last years, and I'd say Cinema 4D is a de facto standard regarding everything motion graphics, 3D interfaces, all of that non-photorealistic stuff. Everybody's using Cinema 4D. So if you are looking for a career in advertising, learning Cinema 4D is probably a good idea.
I would agree, yeah.
And at the same time, Cinema 4D is quite a capable program. They have a lot of modules. They feature a node-based programming system. They have a Python integration. They offer particles, although not very modern ones, to be honest.
Absolutely not.
And visual effects is, of course, the weak side of the program.
Yes, it is not very performant when it comes to huge scenes.
And no fluid simulation whatsoever. For this, you will rely on xparticles usually, which is again another, I don't know, few $100 that you have to spend on top of the Cinema 4D license to get these. And even that is, it's not node-based. It's using the Cinema 4D object manager paradigm to build setups, which is, in my opinion, not well suited for very complex stuff. But overall, you get a very capable package. And now that they went subscription, you probably get a lot of features. I don't know how it goes, but at least you have a program where you know that the adoption is widespread and that you will find a lot of employers that pay attention to your Cinema 4D skills.
Weirdly enough, when following our Twitter Bubbles feed, I'm getting the impression that some of the hardcore Cinema 4D users are now eyeing Blender more and more now that it's...
I don't think so. They are eyeing Blender and Houdini because they I get the impression that a lot of people think, well, Blender might be as user-friendly as Cinema 4D, but maybe not that capable regarding features. But on the other hand, you have this beast of Houdini that can do everything. And I think I read some tweets about, well, I will probably look at Blender and Houdini in combination.
Yeah.
And I can understand this. Of course, it's sort of true.
We can discuss that maybe later if that's a good combination in our opinion. So we discussed industry adoption in Cinema 4D, mainly motion graphics, advertising, accessibility. I mean, with a subscription, price of entry is a bit lower than when you just have to pay the X grand for a perpetual license up front. I think accessibility from a usability standpoint is unmatched with any other tool so far. Educational content is out there. It's usually pretty decent. Of course, you have some tutorials are better, some are worse, but you always have that.
But overall, I have the feeling that the Cinema 4D educational resources that you get even for free are quite good usually.
Usually they're good. And feature-wise, it's a decent package.
It's a decent package if you do motion graphics and stuff. It's a little bit lacking regarding visual effects.
Absolutely.
And character animation. It's everything is there that you need, but it's not the most performant one. And that brings me to Maya, I'd say.
Okay, that's the one where I have to trust purely on your experience, because I think I opened Maya exactly once 10 years ago and then never touched it.
Yes, and I don't have a lot of experience either, because I used to use Softimage when it was a thing. I used to use Maya 3.0. That's quite some years ago. But Maya was the de facto industry standard for everything, and all schools were teaching Maya, and Maya was considered the skill you had to have in your resume to start working.
Yeah.
And I think that changed. And of course, Maya is still very present in the pipelines. And I personally think that is because of the hassle it is to just change or switch out one component of the pipeline.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think Maya is quite customizable. It is very programmable, and it has a node-based architecture, and it is very feature-rich. And now that they added node-based flow graph style programming with the introduction of Bifrost or Bitfrost, I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
I'm not sure.
I think it is really, it has everything that it needs. And I don't think that Maya will go anywhere in the near future. It will just stay where it is. So if you ask me, I think whenever you want to go AAA with games or a feature, Maya is a good choice because it will be used in the pipeline usually. Me personally, I did not like it too much because I always found it to be hard to learn, cumbersome, and not very well structured. But that could have changed over the years. I don't know.
So do we have any idea about the tutorials out there, about the educational infrastructure out there?
Not really.
Okay, so that's the big question mark. I mean, you guys can leave us comments, your opinions on that. Again, these two guys are not really Maya hardcore users.
No, not
so really. Let us know how you think the features, the performance is, how you think the industry adoption is, how you think accessibility is.
Yeah, would be interesting.
What else do we have?
We do have 3D Studio Max, but here the situation is even worse.
Yeah, never used that either, so...
I did not use it in 15 years, so I really couldn't tell. Back then, I found it to be quite strange, with a strange paradigm, but yeah, and not very procedural, but might have changed. I don't know. So we have to skip 3D Studio Max.
Okay, let's skip that and go through one of our most beloved tools, which leaves us at Houdini.
Yes, Houdini. And Houdini is, of course, I think for both of us, the perfect tool.
Yeah.
Because it is just insanely powerful and it is
crazy.
Insanely customizable.
Some people would claim it's insanely difficult.
And it is, I agree. I really think, and all this power... I think it's okay to say that Houdini is the most powerful DCC out there, where you can do most of everything. So you can actually really, there is nothing you cannot do with Houdini.
That is correct.
As long as you have the idea about how to do it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's true that it is not as easy to approach as maybe other tools. And that is not, of course, if you have a lot of power, you have a certain degree of complexity, and that means it will be difficult. if you, I don't know, if you want to do a cross product because you need it, you have to understand the cross product. There's not much you can do about it.
Yeah. So let's put it that way. Houdini is laid out more as an IDE, as a development environment for 3D graphics, I think. And with that comes the assumption that the user has an idea of what they are doing.
Yes.
So you cannot expect your stuff to be nicely packaged in a can and click here and have this effect, but you will have to build up your stuff by yourself.
Although I have the feeling that they are going down this route lately.
Yeah, but they are making it more accessible.
They're working on tools that are pre-packaged and just work out of the box without compromising the flexibility.
That's right.
Under the hood. And I think I have the impression or the feeling that some stuff is a little bit overcomplicated in Houdini sometimes.
Definitely.
Like, for example, I don't know, plugin management or so.
Yeah.
Where you just throw a plugin into a folder with the other software. In Houdini, you used to have to edit the env file with a certain syntax, and now they changed this with packages, and it stays quite flexible, but still it's just you have to know the structure of the package file to make it work.
Yeah.
And in other software, it's just intuitive.
Yeah, Houdini itself is very Unix or Linux-like in that regard.
Absolutely. And I have the feeling that inside of Houdini, you often get to the point where you have to have certain knowledge that is not common sense. Certain knowledge that is not even mathematics or programming, but it is just side effect specific knowledge.
Yeah,
so you have to know how certain attributes are named, or you have to know that certain functions are there, or you have to know how certain things are called.
Yeah.
And you don't get any hints. Like, let me give you an example, like with visual programming, for example. Cinema 4D Espresso used to be built the way that if you wanted to know what attribute to use, you could just go to a drop-down menu, and the drop-down menu was populated with all the attributes that are there.
Yeah.
So you could just choose from what you have. And in Houdini, that's not the case. You just have to remember the name of your attribute. Yeah. A lot of people will say, well, great, but as long as you're working with your attribute, you should know how the name is. And that is true, but it's just a little example of how you could, without compromising quality or flexibility or power, you could make things a little easier on the user.
Yeah.
So I think there is room for improvement in this regard if you talk about Houdini.
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree. Although I would also agree on you stating that side effects are making some steps towards making it more user-friendly or more unified to the beginner. So very powerful. Industry adoption-wise, I think it's seeing more and more adoption, especially with the need to generate huge projects or huge assets, not only in feature, film, or VFX, but also in advertising, and especially in games.
Yes. It used to be really confined to this visual effects bubble, and I think they successfully left this bubble and now are just propagating outwards. Yeah. And we used it a lot in advertising and motion graphics, and we as Entagma started to use it as motion graphics tool, which was not intended usage.
No, absolutely not.
And now games are relying more and more on Houdini, but I think we will see more Houdini usage into the future.
I think so too. Accessibility, we talked about this. It's an IDE. It is a very steep learning curve at the beginning. However, not only did the tutorial material increase, I mean, there's us, but there's a ton of other really great Houdini tutorials out there. But also side effects documentation of Houdini improved over the last 2 versions dramatically, I think.
That's true. And not only that, but all the learning material they collect on their side and create themselves is excellent.
Yeah, and they have learning paths.
The learning material for Houdini is there, and it's excellent usually.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's a lot of effort you have to put in the hours, but it's possible.
And also, when learning Houdini, you are kind of forced to not only learn the basics of 3D apps or 3D DCC, but also you're forced, if you like it or not, to learn the basics of computer science to a certain degree.
But the funny thing is you have to do this anyways.
That's my point.
If you are using Blender and you get stuck with shading errors,
Yeah.
of course you can watch a tutorial how to fix shading errors and maybe you get them fixed. But more often than not, you don't get them fixed. And the only chance to find a solution is to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think in this regard, Houdini makes it even easier because it forces you to learn the
Principles,
basics.
yeah.
And in Blender maybe or Cinema 4D, you might get the feeling that it's not necessary to learn anything about computer graphics, which is just not true.
Yep. At some point, it's going to bite you. Yeah.
Yeah, it will bite you because, to be honest, 3D computer graphics is just a very complicated topic.
Yeah, it is. Still.
It is a lot of engineering and it is math and it is vectors and it is understanding stuff. So, yeah. Well, a lot of people ask me now that I'm at the university, what should I learn? Which program should I learn?
What's your advice typically?
What will get me a job later? And I really, my honest belief is it really doesn't matter at all. Because I think it's about learning the principles, like what we just discussed.
Yeah.
A little bit of computer graphics, but not only that. There is a certain way of approaching a model. There is polymodeling or NURBS modeling, and it has advantages and disadvantages. So I think it's important to learn the concepts of 3D, and it doesn't matter which program you use for that. I decided to start with Blender because it does not offer everything, and that makes it easy for my students to just focus on the important stuff and learn the principles.
What is the important stuff? What is the basics, the boot camp that you teach your students?
Well, I start out with the 3D space, like nested coordinate systems, and what is 3D space and Cartesian coordinates, and what is a 3D object. It's a matrix and some polygonal data, and then the very important distinction between continuous and discrete models of reality, and that we are working discretely in computer graphics. That is important. And then, of course, modeling, and then the 3D pipeline, like we have a model and then we have a render process that shoots rays and finds a shading point and evaluates a shader, and how does the image come to be. So how do we create the image from the model and this process? I think all of this is very important. And while learning all of this, of course, you are touching on topics like surface normals and winding order and watertight models and all of this stuff. But it comes naturally if you just look at the overall or the underlying process, the shading pipeline.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, what we want to create is images. So we create models of the world, and then we try to create images from these models. So understanding this process is important.
How much time do you spend teaching that?
Well, this is actually material for 1 year.
Okay.
It is 1 year of modeling, shading, lighting, rendering, sampling, all of this stuff. Yes. And I think once you learn this, no matter where, be it Blender, be it Cinema 4D, be it Maya, be it Moto, you will be able to take this knowledge and with a little effort, apply it to a different program. Because basically, of course, there's always unique stuff, but basically, they are all doing the same thing.
Maybe let's tie into that, because what we discuss internally between the two of us is a certain kind of style of tutorial which we like rather than other styles of tutorials, which are these types of tutorials that occupy themselves with the underlying principle, with trying to communicate a principle to you, instead of, quote unquote, just showing you which shortcut to use or which buttons to press in which order. I think...
Yes, absolutely. And that is, of course, a little bit the Entagma philosophy. We always try to do that with our tutorials. And that is, by the way, why we sometimes do not bother showing how exactly we created a shader on one of the models, or how exactly we did exactly the effect that you're seeing in the graphics, because that is not the point of our teaching. We don't want to teach how to mimic what we show. Instead, we want to,
communicate a principle.
Communicate a principle, give insight to the technique behind it.
We kind of got derailed here, so we forgot a few of the tools that we mentioned. We mentioned Moto, we mentioned 3D Code and ZBrush. Do we want to briefly elaborate on that?
Absolutely. With Moto, I have a hard time. When Moto still belonged to Luxology, I was quite excited about Moto because it had an insane development pace.
Okay.
And they came out with new updates all the time. It was just, they did things differently. It had a very beautiful interface. The modeling was just great.
Yeah.
And interesting new tools. But I have the feeling that development stalled a little bit since it is owned by the Foundry. So I have the feeling that 3D is probably not the focus of the Foundry. They are more focused on compositing, probably with Nuke and the like. But I could be mistaken. So again, if you have opinions on that or insights, I would be glad if you put them in the comments.
That leaves us to the two sculpting tools. Let's call them sculpting tools for lack of better terminology, which is ZBrush and 3D Code.
Yes, and 3D Code is not very well known. People are using ZBrush everywhere, and rightfully so, because it's an excellent tool. I personally don't like the user interface or the UX design, the user interaction model behind it. To me, it always felt overcomplicated and strange. And that is maybe because ZBrush actually is, the ZBrush all of us know and love, used to be the brush editor of a 2.5D drawing application called ZBrush.
And that is weird.
It is weird, but it's probably because of this historical fact that using ZBrush feels a little strange at first. Yeah. But of course, it has, if you ask me, the most natural brushing engine I ever encountered in a sculpting program, and it is the industry standard. So whenever you're going assets or environments, you will have to use ZBrush.
So how does 3D Code compare to that or factor in here?
Yeah, 3D Code is a very interesting program, if you ask me, but it is a very different program.
In which regard?
It's a sculpting program, but instead of just trying to really polish your sculpting experience, as ZBrush does, it has a lot of different techniques to offer. So it offers surface sculpting like ZBrush. And I did not try out the latest version, which just was released 2 weeks ago or a month ago or so. But it never felt as polished as ZBrush in this regard. But there was one thing inside of 3D Code that is just phenomenal and unique, and that is voxel sculpting. So what you can do with 3D Code is sculpting side distance fields directly. And that offers a lot of freedom, especially in the conceptual stages, where you can just create unrestricted without thinking about topology once. So you just have a blob, and if you want to poke a hole into the blob, you just do it. And that is really unique about 3D Code. And 3D Code was very cumbersome to use too, because I don't know why. Maybe because it's a very small company creating it. But it gets better and better. And they released a very, very overhauled, polished new version that I still have to try out, that adds node-based materials and rendering and whatever to the program. So I always used both ZBrush and 3D Code.
Okay.
Like for my scanning workflow, for example, I use 3D Code for cleaning all the scanned data, and then ZBrush for perfecting or polishing the surface details. Both important programs.
Okay. So let's close this, maybe sum this up. So we could say, in our opinion, it really doesn't matter which 3D DCC you decide for when you're starting out, or maybe when you want to add something to your tool bag. It's more important to kind of grasp the underlying principles, which are the bits of knowledge that you can transport to any other 3D app.
Absolutely. Like, just think topology of a polymodel.
Yeah.
If you once understood how topology flows and how you solve certain situations, learning where to find the extrude tool is not that hard, actually, in whatever DCC.
Yeah.
And to be honest, think about it. If you're going freelance, for example, and you are taking on a new gig and they just use a different DCC, you have to switch.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to wait for you training everybody on your DCC, right? No. So I really think my advice would be focus on the techniques, on the underlying principles instead of the user interface.
But let us know what you guys think. Let us know maybe what's your favorite DCC, what's the DCC or the app that you want to try next. Just leave it in the comments. And yeah, I think that is it.
That is it, but I have another request. So if anyone really knows what the best DCC is...
Oh, yeah, please.
Let us know. But please don't kill yourself, kill each other in the comments. That would not be the idea of this rant.
All right, so that's it for this time.
Cheers.
And goodbye.